Hi, I'm John from Autel, and today we're going to go over some of the features and navigation of the Autel scan tool. Now we're going to be using an Ultra scan tool in this video. The features we're going to be going over is going to be found on pretty much any one of our tools. So even if you don't happen to have the Ultra, it'll be basically the same type of features and navigation that you'd find on any of the other tools in our product line, as long as they're fully dedicated scan tools. So starting with the 906 Pro, going all the way up to the Ultra. Now, as those of you that have this tool know, there's quite a few features packed into these tools. So this is probably going to be part one. In part one, we're going to go over primarily the settings menu and the diagnostic menu. We've already have the scope menu for those that have the 919 or the Ultra. So that's already a video out on our YouTube channel. If you wanted to know more about the scope, you can just search out that video and find that. In part two, we'll pick up some of the other features such as Remote Expert and all the other stuff that's on the tool there. So when you first get your tool, you will have to register the tool. Now when you register the tool, you'll have to create an Autel account. My guess is you probably already have an Autel account if you have any piece of our equipment. And then once you go ahead and register the tool, at that point, the first thing you'd want to go to is the settings button. So obviously you'd power it up first, but then once it's powered up, you'd go to the settings button. Now your tool may look a little bit different than this one, only because as an Autel employee, I have every single option that we have available on my tool. So your tool may not have the EV section, the ADAS section, stuff along those lines, but you'll definitely have the settings and you definitely have the diagnostic button. So scroll through the menus until you find the gear with the gray box around it that says settings. Now when I go into the settings menu here, we got a couple things that we want to pull out, closer attention to. There's quite a bit of stuff in here. I'm only going to show you the highlights, the most important ones. So the first one here, it defaults at the top of the screen to unit. That's units of measurement. So if you happen to be a European customer, you're probably going to select metric unit. If you happen to be from the States, it's probably going to be imperial unit. Now when I make a selection under settings, that's going to be a holistic change to everything. So all your data stream and everything is going to now be, in this case I have it selected as imperial. Everything would be in imperial, or everything would be in metric if you chose that. You can always go in, if there's certain data stream PIDs that you want to see in the opposite form of measurement, you can always go in and select just those certain PIDs to translate them. So for myself personally, I like everything to be in imperial, but when I'm looking at mass airflow grams per second, I want that to be in grams per second, right? So I'll go in, I'll show you how to do that, how you can change any one PID to another way of another unit of measurement as opposed to doing a holistic change for everything. So language, this is very important that we talk about this. Depending on where you bought your tool at, what region you bought it in, if you bought it in the States, it's going to be defaulted into English. Obviously you can see as I scroll on up, we have quite a few different languages. If you wanted to go ahead and add a language, now pay attention, I said add, not change. You'd have to call our tech support. It can definitely be done, but don't ask them to change the language, because if you ask them to change the language, now it's only going to be displayed in that other language. So make sure you say the words, I want to add another language. That way you can always go back to, in this case, English, if that's what I wanted. I wouldn't be able to read the other language. So I'm very fluent in English. I'm not so fluent in any of these other languages. So if I had said change it to, say, Spanish or French or whatever, it'd be next to impossible for me to go ahead and be able to even read to go back to anything else. Tech support is the one that can actually add the language. So even if I were to push on one of these buttons right now, it would not change the language for me. That tech support has to be involved with that. But make sure you say the word add as opposed to change. Printing settings, that's something that we'll talk about in a future video. Again, this video I want it to be, hard-hitting, just what you need to know to get your tool set up and to start using it and start navigating it. Same with report settings, push notifications, auto update. I guess I'll make a quick reference to auto update. I have mine turned off. We know that As long as you have a current subscription on your tool, there's quite a few different updates that are released, weekly. I can actually set it up so instead of me having to manually install the updates, I could just set it up to auto update. The rule of thumb is if you're going to set it up to auto update, make sure that you set it for a time that's not during your business hours, right? So maybe from midnight to 1 a.m. or something like that. That way your tool's not tied up with an update when you're trying to make money with it. ADAS and aligner, that's going to be covered in greater detail in the future. I'm going to scroll on down here because the first thing you're going to need to do after you create the account is go to System Settings, and you're going to have to select a Wi-Fi network. This is how it's going to connect to the Autel servers, so you get all the helpful information, all the diagnostic information you're after. This is how you're going to get all the updates. This is how auto auth is going to work for any secure gateway modules, everything along those lines. So you would be able to just connect it to whatever your Wi-Fi network happens to be, and then obviously type in the username and password. That's pretty much the meat of what we're going to cover under the settings menu in this particular video. So let's go ahead and go right back into the main menu and select the red button that says Diagnostics. Again, your version may not say ADAS in the car. Again, if you happen to have the ADAS software, it would look just like that. So under the Diagnostics section, I'm going to go ahead and show you this screen first, and we're going to exit out of here, and we're going to pretend like we're hooked to a car in demo mode here in a little bit. But I wanted to show you this first because in the Diagnostics section, we have in the upper left-hand corner something that says EOBD. So that's your global OBD2 selection. It does not force you to pick a make of car or anything else. Again, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know the benefit of going to the generic or global side of OBD2. You won't get this if you go ahead and start going into, say, Chrysler or Chevrolet or anything else. If you notice at the top of the screen too, we do go ahead and give you some buttons on the top. So the first one is the vehicle identification button. It's highlighted in blue. So if I touch that, it's going to ask me, what do I want to do? Do I want to have the tool auto detect whatever type of vehicle I have it plugged into, which is most of the time what all of us are going to be using. But I can also go ahead and manually input it. So I can select the year, make, model, all that kind of stuff. And then I can also scan the VIN or the license plate. Word of caution by scanning the license plate, make sure that the plates that are on the car are actually registered to that vehicle. You know, if the vehicle comes into your shop for, say, a failed emissions test, you know, obviously their license plates are no good. They might have just screwed on another pair of license plates so they don't get pulled over on the way there. So I prefer either doing auto detect or manual input. Most of us are always going to select auto detect. Next to that, we have, it defaults into all. So if I go ahead and get rid of that box, all is going to show you every single type of vehicle that this scan tool has the capability of connecting to. There's quite a few, right? So, and some of these vehicles aren't even found in the United States, right? Because Autel is a global company. So I can go ahead and I can either scroll through this long list if I wanted to, but let's say I was trying to hook up to a specific, you know, model of car or something along those lines. I can create a favorites button. I can do a history button. So maybe I'm scanning 10 cars that day and I just want to go back into history and select the third car that I scanned that day. But I also have America, Europe, Asia, China, plus a little magnifying glass. So if I wanted to, if I were to select America, for instance, any vehicle that's not sold in America is now not on that main menu. So only the vehicles sold here in the United States. Well, I shouldn't say sold in the United States, only the vehicles that are created here in the United States. If I were to select Asia, then you're going to have all the Asian manufacturers come up. So it's a little shortcut. I can always go back to all. They didn't go anywhere. It's just a different way for me to find them. But if I was looking for a specific type of car, if I hit the little magnifying glass, it brings up a search bar, and I can start to type whatever type of vehicle I'm looking for. So let's say I happen to be looking for I don't want to use any of the ones that are on this screen, so let's say I happen to be looking for a Ford, right? So I got to spell it right for it to be able to find it, F-O-R-D. So now I pull up just the two Fords. So the Ford European version plus the actual Ford American version. So there's quite a few different ways that I can actually get past this screen. Now to allow me to not have to have a car hooked up, since this is just a navigational type of video here, I'm going to just simply go back to the home button at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to scroll on over till I find the blue button that says demo, which is going to simulate me being hooked up to a live vehicle. And we got a couple different types of demos. So we got one demo dedicated just to ADAS, one dedicated just to our EV stuff. The rest of them are going to be dedicated towards, you know, whatever type of example I'm after here. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit the GM button. So now I get this little box. Now everybody always wants to know, what does this box do? A lot of times we hit just the Standalone Diagnostics button, check that little box, and we go right into the car. What this box is asking us for is what type of report we want to create. Do I care about a report at all? If you are a collision shop, you cannot, and you're doing pre and post scans, you cannot hit Standalone Diagnostics. You have to go ahead and type some information in as we go through. If you are a mechanical shop, it's not a bad idea to do pre and post scans anyways, but for the sake of this video, that's what that box is there for. So we got, again, this is just part one, so I'm just going to go into Standalone Diagnostics because we got a lot of stuff to cover in this series of navigational videos. So it's going to say no calibration record. We're going to say okay, and now it's going to go ahead and it's going to think it's hooked to a GM in the demo mode. So I'm going to select read VIN. It comes up with a demonstrational VIN number here. I'm going to say okay, and then it's going to decode the VIN, and it's going to tell you some information about the vehicle. Now, you may get a vehicle that asks you on the right-hand side of the screen certain questions. Sometimes the questions are pretty straightforward. It might ask you stuff like, does it have parking aid sensors? Other times it might just go ahead and give you some letters and some numbers. Those are called RPO codes. You don't want to just guess at that, because if you just guess at that, if you told it had, say, a premium sound system on it, and all of a sudden the vehicle doesn't have a premium sound system, well, then you might be setting some trouble codes and stuff because it's saying that there's a fault. The fault in this case is it doesn't exist. You told it did on the RPO code. So I know it's a kind of a pain in the butt, but basically the RPO codes are going to be found on a sticker. The sticker can be found different locations on the car. A couple of the highlight places would be like in the glove box, maybe inside the driver's door jamb area. Sometimes it'll actually give you the information right on the sticker. Sometimes it's going to be a QR code that you have to scan with your phone, and then once you scan it with your phone, it's going to pull up all the RPO codes. But in demo mode, it didn't ask us for any kind of RPO stuff, but don't just guess on that. If it asks you for that, you know, maybe there's 3 different transmission models available on that particular vehicle or whatever. Make sure you give it the proper information. So I'm going to say, okay, this all looks pretty good to me. I'm going to hit the OK button. Now it's going to simulate trying to be hooked up to a vehicle. And it's, as long as you have a current subscription and as long as it's a 909, 919 or Ultra Scan tool, I will get the Topology Screen. Now the Topology Screen, it's not really meant to be a huge diagnostic version of this video, but this is great for all the techs in here that understand if I got a communication fault, this is a very valuable screen to help me diagnose any type of U or network related types of codes. On this same screen here, I'd have to hit fault scan. Now if I hit fault scan, it's going to go ahead, I'll just go ahead and hit fault scan now. It's going to pretend like it's trying to interface each one of those modules one by one, and you'll see that the modules are changing colors as it starts to talk to them. So anyone that actually has trouble code stored in it will actually turn like an orange-brown color, and there's going to be a little number that tells you how many codes are in each one of those. Now, once it's done, I will have the option to go ahead and either save this to a report. Again, it won't be a pre and post scan because I didn't select that. I selected Standalone Diagnostics, but I would have the option to do that. I can do a quick erase from this location right here, which would erase the codes from all the modules. I don't recommend doing that for diagnostic purposes until after you're all done with this diagnosing this vehicle. But I have a couple ways that I can go and see what those codes are. I can go ahead and touch one of those boxes, right? One of those modules. So let's say I had no idea what a PEPS is. I can actually just touch it one time. It comes up and it tells me what that module means, so keyless entry module, and then notice it has a little arrow underneath it. If I were to hit that little arrow, it's going to take me directly to that one module. Sometimes I do that when I'm diagnosing a vehicle, but most of the time I go ahead and I hit the list button at the top of the screen, because the list button is going to go ahead and give me the codes and the identification of those codes and the type of code for all the modules that it just set codes in. And I can scroll on down, so there's all the codes, what it means, if it's a history code, if it's an active code, you know, it tells me all the stuff that we actually have here. Now, as I scroll down the list here, I'll have a list of all the modules. Notice I have a flag. That flag that's in blue says ADAS. You'll also have flags if it was an EV or a hybrid or related car that would be a different color that would tell you that has something to do with high voltage. What these flags mean in Autel is this is something that this module has some type of control under ADAS in this scenario here, which means to you as a technician that you may be required by the OEM to perform an ADAS calibration on something because of this module here. So depending on what the code was, or maybe the service that you did on the vehicle or whatever, it may require some more work. This is your way of knowing when you call the customer to let them know up front, hey, this is what your codes are, but because it has something to do, in this case, in this example, ADAS, you know, from your OEM manufacturer, the vehicle that you bought from that OEM, they recommend that we have to calibrate the forward-facing camera or the radar or whatever the case happens to be. Same scenario would apply if it's electric drive related. So at the bottom of the screen, we're going to pull our attention over here real quick. I have a couple different buttons down here at the bottom. I have one that says Remote Expert. Now, Remote Expert is something we're going to cover in great detail in part 2 of this series. This is a great option for a shop that's traditionally using, say, a mobile diagnostic guy or something to come out to do some programming for them or help them diagnose a problem or maybe even help with the ADAS calibrations, whatever. We have vetted industry experts. Now, what that means, we're not doing, Autel itself is not doing any of the stuff when you hit Remote Expert. We're just providing the service. We have went ahead and got people hooked up from the industry in our Remote Expert system here. So for instance, let's say we're working on General Motors. A vetted expert would be somebody that has factory GM training. Doesn't matter what the car line is, they're going to be an expert on whatever factory training they have. They have the OEM tooling. They have all the software for that particular vehicle. That's how we vetted them to make sure that when I use this button and I hit Remote Expert, that if they take the job on, so if you tell me, hey, I just replaced a module, I need it programmed, or whatever the scenario happens to be, you can rest assured that they are more than qualified to perform that function. You will go ahead and use a credit card to pay them. There'll be tons of experts that are bidding on the job. You can select your favorite from a list. You can select, based off a price, whatever the case happens to be. The wait time on this is way less than anywhere else. So you don't have to wait for a Remote Expert guy to come to your shop. You don't have to use some of the other competitors' lineups where maybe you can get your car programmed that day. Maybe it's going to be 2 days from now or whatever. We have the ability to go ahead with our experts that we have set up in here to get this service done. You don't have to leave. You don't have to take the car out of your service base. You don't have to make an appointment at a dealership or anything else. This is something we do for you. Again, you are paying directly the expert itself. That expert will be able to communicate you as well as you can communicate with the expert throughout the whole procedure. We also have vehicle data. Now, vehicle data is, we partnered recently with Motor TrueSpeed, an information database. It's an option. It's not free unless you happen to have bought your Autel scan tool from November 1st of 2024 to December 31st of 2024. It's a promo we're giving, a free year's worth of Motor TrueSpeed data. The nice thing about Motor True Speed and the Autel partnership is it's integrated with your tool. So for instance, I could actually hit the vehicle data button right now. It already knows the type of car I'm working on. I told it. In this case, it's a demonstration mode, but it knows it's hooked to a GM. It knows the year, the make. If there's codes present, it will open up with TSBs on it, but I can always search just like any other database. I could search stuff like wiring schematics, you know, everything you find in a normal database. The report button down here is where I would actually be able to, if I did pre and post scans and stuff, I'd be able to start doing, populating a report. I can add pictures to the report, you know, before and after pictures. I can still quick erase. We already told you I don't like that myself until the job is 100% done. Fault scan, we already pushed that. I can enter a specific system, right? So those are my choices there. I'll go back to the topology screen here. I'm going to go ahead and say control unit. And I'm going to just pick the first one because everything I'm about to show you is going to be the same no matter which module you selected. So I have a couple different choices on the left-hand side of the screen. One's going to be called ECU Information. This is a great place. It's going to tell you like the calibration, the current calibration of, in this example, the engine control module, right? I have trouble codes, which you can go into trouble codes, but if you did the topology screen, you already know it had trouble codes in it. One example that I would say that it's important to go into trouble codes is if this was a Ford vehicle, because Ford has different types of codes, as we all know. So I may want to see the continuous memory codes or the key on engine off codes or whatever. So in that case, I'd go to there. In most of the other car lines though, I'm not too concerned about the trouble code section, only because I just did the topology, I already seen it. What we want to concentrate on for tonight's video is going to be the next three buttons here. So I'm going to go to live data, and it's going to simulate connecting to the car. So we'll wait for it to say, okay, we got communication. Now it's going to come up and it's going to say, what type of data do I want to look at? This is going to be different per car line. So I can look at all the data, but the problem with looking at all the data at once is it affects the refresh rate of your scan tool. So General Motors in this example went ahead and took the ECM data and broke it down for me so I don't see all the data at once. So I'm going to go to engine data here, and we'll let it go ahead and start communicating, and now it defaults into our numerical PID list here. So again, I already had it holistically set up as imperial. So you happen to notice the third one down says engine coolant temperature sensor, and if I look at the far right-hand side of the screen, it's defaulted into degrees of Fahrenheit. Now, I can go ahead, I got little check boxes next to each one of these. If I wanted to select certain data and do certain things with it, I'd have to hit the little check boxes. We'll come back to that here in a second. Before we do that, let's go ahead and hit the little drop-down arrow next to engine coolant temperature sensor. And now I have different ways I can view this data. So it defaults into what we call the capital A here, into what you see. But if I wanted to look at it as an analog gauge, I could hit that, right? I can go back with that little drop-down menu. I hit the capital A, it takes it back to what we saw before. I can also graph that data. So at this point, once the graph is up, I can actually graph several lines of data and show it different ways. But I have a set Y, I have the X and the Y over here. So it's going to default into certain amplitude and certain time. I can change the amplitude and time of this by hitting the set Y and the X and the Y buttons at the top over there. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the little drop-down menu here. I can also use a bar graph display. So here it would populate up if this car was running with the blue line telling me what temperature the engine was running at. I'm going to go back to that little drop-down menu. If I did not know, so let's say there was an abbreviation that said, you know, ECT, and I didn't know what that stood for. If I hit the little info button, it would tell me what that means. Now this one, probably a bad example to show because it spells it all out for me, engine coolant temperature sensor. Here's where I can change just one line of data. If I hit the little scale, it's going to default into the metric version because I had it holistically set up as degrees of Celsius. I had it holistically set up for imperial. Now I don't want that, so I'm going to hit that again, make it go back to Fahrenheit. And I'm also going to go ahead and hit the A again. Now, on this screen, I have a couple different choices. So I'm just going to click a couple of these different PIDs here from our list. I'll say that, I'll say mass airflow, and I'll say engine load. So there's 4. Now I could be graphing this if I wanted to, or I can say go to the top. If I hit go to the top, notice what happened. No matter what, it doesn't matter what order they were in before, now those 4 are on the top. Could be great for diagnosing different types of problems. If I go ahead and say I want to go ahead and graph these, so I'll just turn graphs on for these. And let me scroll on up and graph this one. Now I can go ahead and say I got my 4 graphs. I got different ways I can look at these graphs. I can make them in, different parts of the screen, all that kind of stuff. But most people are going to probably look at them this way. I can do a graph merge. So if I hit graph merge, I have those 4 graphs now displayed on the same screen here. And again, remember, I can go ahead and change the X and the Y, which is the height of those waveforms and the time. So for instance, maybe I have an oxygen sensor and I'm on global side and it maxes out at 1 volt top. Maybe I want to make that scale a little bit bigger. So maybe I want to make it go from 0 volts to 2 volts or something along those lines. So I have a way that I can actually do all that. I can also go ahead and say, let's just go ahead and cancel all that. So we're going to say, all right, we don't care about any of those graphs. I can also record a movie. Now, when I hit the record movie button, I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, this data, the way how it's being displayed is what we're going to go ahead and record. It says the data and the record, I have to select data. So I thought it saved it, but let me just go ahead and select the top 4 again. And then I'm going to say record. Now, notice a couple things happens here. Number 1, I have a recording that I'm going to start recording, but I can actually go ahead and let's say the customer's complaint was it stalls out or something along those lines. Notice we have a flag here. So if I hit the flag button, I can create an actual flag of when to actually start to record or stop recording, whatever the case happens to be. Let me go ahead and hit the resume button. Notice I now have another button there that says review. I didn't have an option for a review before because there was no movie in its memory, right? I have to store a movie before I have that. So at this point, I could hit the review button and review that. Now what I want to do is I want to go to the active test button on the left-hand side of the screen here. And the active test is going to come up and it's going to say, there's going to be a whole different list for every different type of car. Anytime we're dealing with a true scan tool in Autel's mind is something that does true bidirectional controls, which is a little confusing for us technicians because technically we have something called service functions. And service functions such as, hey, I want to do brakes on this car, but I got electronic parking brakes and I got to retract the pistons, right? Well, that's kind of bidirectional, but that's technically a service function. One case in point that I want to pull out for that is, if our tool says it can do something, it will definitely do it. It just may not be in the menu that you're looking for. The reason being is we go ahead and try to copy the same way that the OEMs do their software layout on their OEM scan tools. So for instance, if we're talking electronic parking brakes, even though it's going to be listed under service menu, if you hit that and you say, hey, it's not working, go into the actual module. So it could be the ABS module or whatever it happens to be, body control module, and then go ahead and select it that way. That just means that's the way the OEM does it, so we put it in the same type of format as the OEM does. So active tests over here, we got quite a few. If I go ahead and I selected cooling fan, let's say, it's going to ask me what type of active test I want to do. So this is a bidirectional test. Cooling fan relay 1, fan relay 2, cooling fans 1, 2, and 3, or engine coolant, thermostat, heater, and cooling fan. So this is going to be different on every type of car. Obviously this one in this demo mode actually has, it looks like at least 3 different types of cooling fans on this car. I'm just going to go ahead and select cooling fan relay number 1. Again, this is demo mode, so it's just going to populate some erroneous data here. But it basically says, conditions have not been met yet. I have the ability to go ahead, so it's saying turn ignition on. So I have the ability, once I turn the ignition on, in this case, since it's a bidirectional test, to go ahead and turn that cooling fan motor on or off. Now, if it's a motor like that, in the cooling fan example, it's either going to be on or off. Some things like a evap, canister purge solenoid or something like that, it may be pulse width modulated, which means it may change instead of just being on or off. It may say, 5%, 10%. Every time I hit the button, it's going to open up that purge solenoid a little bit more. So again, I'm not sharing anything that you guys don't already know as mechanics, but this is basically where some of the bidirectional tests lie. Now there's another one that's underneath it that says special functions. So let me go ahead and hit the special, let me escape out of here first. And let me go ahead and hit the special function button. Now what's the difference with this? This screen actually pulls up brake pedal position sensor learn, crankshaft position variation learn, engine oil life reset, fuel trim reset. So if you notice, the first one was primarily bidirectional testing, right? Under the special functions, these are going to be stuff where I have to take it a little bit further, right? So we'll use, for instance, I'm relearning the brake pedal position sensor. So if you don't know this, a lot of General Motors will have a brake pedal position sensor that is found, the data is found in a couple different modules. And if you don't go in there and relearn the sensor in all the modules that actually has it, so it could be the ABS module, maybe the body control module, whatever the case happens to be, if I don't go ahead and do a learning process on it, I will still have some trouble code stored when I go through the topology screen because it needs to be learned. Crankshaft position variation learn. I put a new crankshaft on, a new crankshaft position sensor on. It's going to require me, in General Motors case, I got this one memorized, to apply the parking brake, have the car warmed up, and then you're going to go ahead and snap the throttle. So you're going to see a wide open throttle for just a couple seconds, and then it's going to recalibrate or go ahead and relearn the actual crankshaft position variation learn. Engine oil life reset, technically that's also under the service menu functions as well. So maybe I put a new fuel pump in the car. Well, I want to reset the fuel trims. I can do that. So notice these are all stuff that is kind of bidirectional, but not 100% bidirectional. This is more stuff of learning, maybe coding, stuff along those lines. IM system information on the left-hand side of the screen. Primarily, this is for the states that have, emission control, emission systems in their states. This is going to tell me if maybe all the monitors have ran to completion or not, stuff along those lines. Let me go ahead and escape out of here. I'm going to go back to the home menu here, and I'm going to go and look for another button here. So again, you won't have all of these buttons unless you bought all the different available software that we have at Autel. Here's my service button. So I want to cover service in here. It says there's a demonstration task running. I'm glad it says this. I was hoping it would say this before we got on camera, but if there's already a task running, you may have come across this before. It says click on OK to display the running task. At the bottom of the screen, I have the fourth button over next to the little robot guy. I have something that looks like an old-fashioned air pump. I can go in there and just clear that, go back to here. So it's going to shut off the previous test that we had running. I'm going to go back to the service button here, and this is something I wanted to cover in tonight's video. Here's where the service functions are. So notice it didn't ask me what type of car or anything. This is kind of universal across the car lines. Now obviously it won't take effect for different cars once you actually try to use one of these. But notice this here, a lot of times like resetting a TPMS light or the electronic parking brake or something. In our minds as mechanics, we may think these are bidirectional tests, but these are what we call, service functions. I will end the video with this one little comment here that keep in mind that even though like we have IMMO, immobilizer keys, doesn't necessarily mean that this will be an immobilizer tool, right? So remember, some of this stuff is for older cars as well. So if I happen to go back in time to an old-fashioned, something without an immobilizer, like pre-2010, let's say, is safe to say, yeah, the Autel Ultra can go ahead and add a key to your Ford product or an early GM product or something like that. But if it's got the latest and greatest security features in it, immobilizers and stuff like that, you will need a dedicated immobilizer tool from our Autel lineup here. Whether it be a KM100, a 508, or a 608, you need a dedicated immobilizer type of tool. So keep that in mind that there is that. One other thing I'll cover in this part, you can add other tools to this tool. So obviously this particular tool comes with a lab scope, so that's why there's a measurement button on there. But if I notice here, if I scroll on through the list, I should see the ability for battery. I just got to find it on the screen. I got a lot of software on here. So the handheld inclometer, I can use that as an example as well. That would be an ADAS related type of tool, an extra little device that I can do. I can add a handheld battery tester and turn my tool into a battery type of tester. So there's other options that you may push a button on your tool, and if you don't happen to have some of those options, it may not get you anywhere. But that's primarily what I wanted to show you. I know there's a lot of information all at once. I don't want to make these videos too long. So in part 2, we'll go a little bit deeper into some of these other buttons that are on here, primarily the buttons that your tool would actually have. We're not going to really cover the new energy or the EV stuff. Not going to cover the ADAS stuff. We got separate videos for both of those scenarios there. So I hope you found this information helpful, and stay tuned for part 2 in the series where we're going to go a little bit deeper into the tool. Thanks for watching.